I can see now some of you in the grid here now that I'm presenting, so I may need a flag if there's a hand up or a question, or feel free to sort of speak up along the way if you just want to jump in with a question. It's all good. Okay. So good morning, and thank you for signing in. I'm really happy to share with you the story of Sheridan's journey. I hope it's going to help each of you see the potential behind the work we're all doing and collectively doing, and the opportunities actually in our broader communities as well. So not just within our campus environments, but what we can do more broadly. It's, you know, a decade or more of work condensed into, you know, what, 25 minutes or so. So by necessity, at a bit of a high level, there are a lot of layers and depth that I can't really dig into. But at a high level, I want to share with you a bit of the process we followed, share some of the outcomes, and I'll try to wrap up with a bit of kind of what's next in our plan and what else we're kind of focused on. Sound good?
Sounds great.
So to the process, what does success even look like in a planning thing? You know, the main thing I'd like to sort of emphasize out of the points you see here is that successful implementation of a plan, whether to net zero or a breakthrough plan to significant energy and carbon reductions, you want that to feel like the new normal for your institution. There's a huge cultural piece that goes with the technical. So in particular, having your operations team, your construction teams, your planning teams really clearly aligned with how you're going to follow the pathway. And you want to see also by the conclusion of your work, or at least in the process of your work, that there's a transformation in that culture that sort of transcends a facilities view and begins to feel like it's being picked up in the curriculum paths, it's being picked up in the academic dialogue, and it's being picked up in particular in corporate strategy, and you're beginning to see that happen. And you'll find actually along the way with that the institution will begin to garner a reputation that attracts a lot of interest from groups outside, from students, from qualified faculty, people you really want to recruit. And done well, you'll actually find that there's a global appetite for that too. There's actually quite an interesting peer group around the world that's quite interesting. So now the question is really kind of, how do we get there? What do we do? How do we unpack all of this? First thing I would suggest is to take a really objective view of where you are. This seems really obvious and really straightforward, but to be honest, very few people actually take a sober look at what's working and what's not, and what do we have to build. And this isn't an exercise in trying to find blame for the past or create a sense of shame, although these conversations are difficult and they will create a bit of that edge and a bit of that tension as you're having the conversations. You've got to kind of embrace that. You've got to make it clear that this is that, you know, when you're having these discussions, they're open and they're intended to point a path forward, not retrace sort of past mistakes, missteps, or, you know, gee, we wish we were further than we are today. We all do, but that doesn't really help us move forward. So what does help us move forward is understand where the internal processes are not yet aligned. And so one of the key steps you'll hear me advocating for is a really good functional project work team. And again, if I read any energy management textbook, it'll tell me, you know, you got a project team and it has all the stakeholders to it. I view that as often presented and rendered in a fairly empty manner, in the sense that we pull a stakeholder here, we pull a stakeholder there, and then the planning process does little to actually pull them together into a cohesive, aligned group. And that cohesion becomes critical. And it's the kind of thing you can build during planning, but the cohesion is particularly critical when your plan is approved and you've got to implement. If you've done this process well, and that was an effective process team, you'll find that everyone's very clear the first Monday after funding's approved on what's going to happen next. And that goes a really, really long way. This is the first piece of that culture. There's again some more obvious stuff, like are the goals articulated? Are they clear? And in a lot of cases, the goals are nebulous. And I don't mean that everything's got to be a SMART goal. What I mean to say is that there is a degree of measurability, accountability, and clarity on what you're trying to achieve in the plan. And an important thing that I think is just 1,000% overlooked, and I can't for the life of me figure out why. So hopefully I can get you on the right page if you're just starting into it. You're looking for a planning process that's not just doing that alignment, but is advancing you to ultimate approval of that plan at your executive team and board. And the reason I point that out as a critical step is any capital you're going to choose to put forward to your measures, your implementation, has to have that approval. So again, it seems super obvious, but most people are not doing it. They're writing a plan. It's sitting in the facilities team. The executive may have been briefed on it, but may not be clear, and certainly hasn't approved a large funding expenditure to complete the totality of the work in the plan. And that can be true whether it's pulling from strategic reserves, or it's debt financing, or it's seeking grants, or the rest of it. You need that alignment in order to enable the capital flow that you require. And it's multi-year. You don't want to have to keep going back hat in hand every budget cycle to get your budget approved for something that should be a multi-year initiative. And the key bottom line in it all is the institution really needs to create and own the script. It's not sufficient to retain a consultant, outsource the work, and then essentially have that flipped over the fence and try to comprehend it and understand all the pieces that are contained within it. It has to be something you own that's been culturally aligned. And when you go to implement, you're able to really talk intelligently to the market about what you require. So it's education as well as alignment. To illustrate that point just a little bit further, I want you to have a careful look at the kind of representation that's on this project working team here. So this is a college in Michigan that I had the opportunity to help mentor through their process when they were building an integrated energy master plan. Cool thing here is the two executive sponsors at the top represented finance and academic at very senior levels. And so it obviously meant with these two very important functions of the institution in one room, the president was certainly very aware and the board was very aware of the work. Below that, you see all of the core functions that we'd expect in a strategic team, both internal and external partners. So again, kind of speaking to that alignment piece. And this includes, of course, the academic division that's in here in the conversation as everything's unfolding.
I have a question. I totally am on board with the idea you have to get that executive buy-in, and it's much more effective if it can be broader than just facilities.
Yep.
That's hard. That's hard to do. Are there any tricks, or is it just kind of the hard work you have to do? Or a STARS report is quite good because it forces you to engage beyond facilities. So that can be a tool, but are there ways that you found effective at doing that?
Okay, well, Henry Ford in its case is a fairly small institution. So it's a pretty tight working team from senior leadership right through the executive, and that helps a lot for their alignment as far as getting the sponsorship buy-in, but then also from there with that executive alignment, it's a little easier to handpick who you need in the team. Absent that, if you're working a little more organically, I'd say exactly what you said, which is, either through stars or through, other outreach efforts you've had, you get a sense of who's a champion and who might be able to step up. And hopefully you can get somebody who either doesn't care about their workload formula or can find the time or finagle the time to get out there and work on something like this.
Yeah, thanks.
Here's the process. Oh, and I did want to include a note here. So you'll notice I've put Garforth International on the bottom left. I'm crediting them with this particular group of slides because this is some of how they've worked with us to describe a bit of the process that we undertake. Don't take this as my endorsement or that I'm pushing them on you with any of it or any of the process steps. This happens to be something that that they frequently use in their work. I view it really as a fairly generic process. Anyone could do it. Again, not pushing in any particular direction, not pushing any group or entity on you, just trying to illustrate what's happening in the process, okay? Things that are I think interesting and a bit different here in terms of the approach that from what I commonly see in the market, and so hoping you can kind of take away and distill these as maybe key steps in the piece. Once you've got a project working team that more or less makes sense, the first thing you're kind of digging at is from an energy perspective or a carbon perspective, is just sort of the baseline condition. Where have we been, let's say, over the past 5 years or so? From that, it's possible to actually look both at what's in existing plans, what direction you're going to be going in the future automatically, if nothing new entered out of the planning process, but just sort of carrying on in a true business as usual. And you can also agree as a group on what price risk looks like for utilities, for example, or there's an expectation of carbon pricing. Maybe some of the usage profiles, the bounds up and down, things like that. Using some of those risk profiles, it's possible to really project out for 20 or 30 years within a reasonable band what kind of price increase you might see, what kind of energy increase or decrease you're expecting, carbon likewise, and give you really at least in a nutshell, a glance at what the trending is and more or less where it bounds. I find those are very useful conversations, conversation starters, particularly with an executive team who may not be familiar with how much your institution's spending and what market volatility and trends look like. So this is your first foray into understanding that, unpacking that, and communicating that. From there, helpful to benchmark, and ideally globally. So look at what your peers are doing globally. North America has a very poor energy performance relative to the more leading areas of the world, even in similar climates. So I can benchmark Southern Ontario to Austria on climate. You'll find Austrian institutions use 40%, have 40% lower energy intensity on average for the same building function. So it tells you a lot about what's possible in a hurry, particularly with building stuff. The scenarios piece is essentially exactly what you'd imagine. So we can do various technical interventions. How effective might they be? It's just a bit of modeling work. I'll show you a little of how that might get built. And you can test some of those scenarios and actually stack all your measures against the goals you want to achieve. When you've done a few iterations of that, you'll actually be at a point where your project working team can determine whether it's achieved the goals it set out to achieve in terms of the planning. And if it has confidence that it's either achieved it or it's achieved it enough, then the next is that approval step. It's essentially moving your plan through those approval stages. At that point, you'll have a lot of evidence to support and back up the decisions and analysis you've done. So I'm not saying that you need to hit your executive and board with the book of all the stuff you've figured out, but at a high level, you're able to say, we definitively find these statements. Here's our conclusion, here's our recommendation. Plenty of backup if you want to read it. Quick note on just the benchmarking and stuff. Recommend pulling out energy models. With hundreds and hundreds of buildings, that can be a really difficult exercise, but we found even in community work, it's possible to really work with a few common archetypes. So think about a building that's a residential tower versus an academic classroom versus a laboratory facility versus a gymnasium. They all more or less have a similar archetype you could create. And there will be a few exceptions, the very creatively built new building or a particularly poor performer that you could add into the mix. And so then with a bit of work calibrating to the bills and the consumption, you can actually build a pretty representative sample of what's happening. And the beauty of the modeling at this stage is it gives you quite a sense of the breakdown by end use, and it allows you to figure out how much effort you're targeting to something like envelope versus heating systems, cooling systems, and so on. And in turn, the models give you a tool you can use to do a bit of the what if and the analysis pieces, those sort of key bits of the mix, so you can determine the impact of adding more insulation or improving infiltration, for example. The last piece I'll show you on process is there's an integration step. Again, not advocating for tools, just saying there's a lot of information. It's got to come together. The way Garforth tends to look at it, which I kind of like, is give you some buttons so you can look at it campus by campus comparison or put them all together. You can look at end use. You can look at the different scenarios. So remember I said that you're stacking scenarios in. So it might be, how much savings did we manage to create from fixing buildings? How much did we create by improving the integration of heating distribution across the campus? How much did we save in the plant? And being able to stack those up shows you kind of what each contribution is and then how they work to the whole. And it allows you to then cluster those in different groupings where you can do a side-by-side comparison. On the output side, you often will include a bunch of sensitivity analysis. So either adding in a component or changing a factor for enrollment growth or factoring in incentives or not, and so on. Like you can just, you want that ability to do a bit of the what if trade-off. And what you want to see out of that is essentially what happens to the energy picture, what happens to the GHG picture, what happens to the cost picture. And on the cost side, you're going to try to be communicating with your CFO and your board and your executives. So you're going to want financial returns. You're going to want cash flows. You're going to want IRRs. So you want that stuff to pop out of that analysis at the end. Good stuff to have. So in short, that process I just outlined for you is really an opportunity to, though it's a little bit in vogue, it is a mini crude digital twin of your campus that you can actually use for that sensitivity and what if analysis. And it's looking very much at what happens from the fuel, primary fuel combusted or consumed in some way in order to feed electricity or feed heating or whatever the end use function is. And you want to look at that whole picture. That whole supply chain has a lot to unpack. And looking at the supply chain picture and modeling that carefully might provide surprising options for you, particularly on site and behind the meter options for generation, for example. Also gives you a bit of sense of what happens in the totality of the institution. Quite defensible. Just a very nice platform to work from. Any quick questions on that maybe before I just sort of step? I'll do a quick run of what did Sheridan do?
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And incredibly data intensive. And
Yes.
it's just kind of demonstrating the capacity to manage all that data now. It's just kind of exponentially growing and allows you to do this type of modeling. Is it then a software system that you now have and that you and the campus itself can manipulate and use? Are you that sophisticated, or do you have to work with somebody who's really familiar with the software?
The integration itself doesn't have to be massively complicated. It is what you choose to make of it. Let's put it that way. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff we do can be done on linked spreadsheets, where the output of one feeds another. You just need to be able to sort of build the logic in your head. So you've got, for example, a pre-retrofit case building and post-retrofit case building. What happened to the end use in those? But the pieces that provide the data that drops into that, in the case of the buildings, it's those models. So there's some care needed in the models to ensure that they're at least calibrated to reality in some way. Understanding that any model is going to be an imperfect representation of what's actually happening, but you do your best with it. And what I'd say is that you come through the process with the know-how of the integration, really like understanding how and why the analysis unfolded like it did. And you have the artifacts and assets of that work. So you've got those models and calculations and assumptions and drawings you did on the back of a napkin and later transferred. Like that's all there. It's all there as an asset you can continue to work with.
Excellent. Yeah, once you've built it, if it's relatively solid, it can really kind of carry you forward. And
Yep.
it must take some time to build that and understand it well enough to use it effectively.
I found too that we might have done a first or second level assumption to get us into the ballpark. Even some of that at this kind of early investment decision grade. Some things there isn't a huge amount of sensitivity, so you're allowed a bit of a crude estimate. As you then get to the implementation stage, that crude estimate's no longer really valuable for you. You need to go a level in, but you can at least go back to, okay, well, those were the fundamental assumptions we made. Can we carry those forward to the next stage of analysis? It builds.
Yeah.
Okay. So Sheridan's journey about 2010, 2011, we realized that we really hadn't been very strategic about energy. We had no long-term view. It was, we were chasing incentives and very inconsistent patterns of work across the multiple campuses. And there were some really obvious telltale signs, like in addition to a really unmanaged month-to-month energy use, you could walk around the campuses, you could see things that weren't working, you could see things that were really out of date in terms of technology. And if you dug into any of our building automation systems, you'd notice very quickly there were multiple blind spots. And another sort of telltale sign for us was the mix of heating and cooling equipment from building to building. So some with rooftop units, some tied to a central plant. All of that made it the campus unwieldy, unmanageable, just not very effective, not very operationally effective. And it's a small operations team basically chasing a lot of time, just trying to chase problems. So we wanted to focus on obviously some big technical targets. Our first was a push to reduce energy and GHG emissions by about half. We wanted a reasonable return. We figured CFO helped us determine that about a 7% IRR might work for us as an institution. Every institution's answer is a little bit different. That's about a 10-year payback, and in an institutional framework, that's probably not all that outrageous. We wanted the reliability of the system to not degrade, certainly. And we figured that anything we could do to bring a little more source generation, a little more integration into the heating, the electrical networks might improve the reliability of the systems overall. So that was an objective in there. And we saw an opportunity to essentially share what we'd learned. So, just like we're doing here today, we recognized that there would be a lot that we would learn that could be applicable to others. And we wanted to see what we could do to be a role model for that. And as a post-secondary, obviously thinking about how it translates into curriculum, what we could do with that. So this is how kind of the goals we went into. And we focused our planning and implementation on really three key principles. The first is that we do all of the projects as a single cohesive plan. Again, seems really obvious, but it doesn't happen. So the planning says you're doing a 7-course fixed price meal, not a buffet. You don't make a list of measures and then pick and choose which ones you want to do. They all need to be done. And they all need to be done because they have synergy and because there's actually an economic loading order to it, which you're kind of seeing here. We focused a lot, second principle, on just where's global best practice. Again, something that sounds light and fluffy when you say it without meaning it. But if you really put the effort into where is this happening well, in what jurisdiction around the world, again, not just what my neighbor's doing and what's happening here in North America, but in the world, you will find systems, technologies, and approaches that are really, really effective, that can be readily adapted to our environments. And the third then is do things in the correct order. And this is what got us to this Trias Energetica, created by TU Delft in about the 1980 timeframe. So it's been around for some time. It's in virtually every European state national plan. If you look, you'll find some version of this. And the basic idea, I think I would have you carry away is you focus first on things that reduce your demand. So if you're focused on an end use service, it's just how do I deliver that end use service with the least amount of energy, least amount of carbon, least amount of pollution. Second, you focus on how you integrate your systems. And the point of this is basically in facilities where you don't find integration, you miss opportunities to take energy that would be wasted and put it to use somewhere else. So think about your district energy systems, for example. It's basically a network for heat. I could put any kind of heat in it, whether it's recovered heat or generated heat. That's an idea of an integration. And finally, you focus on supply and what you want for supply. Do you want it to be zero carbon? Do you want it low cost? Do you want it available, reliable, whatever? Those decisions you can make around that supply picture. But at that point, you've shrunk the demand to the point where your investment in supply is considerably smaller. So this is how you end up achieving the economics in it. In practical implementation, none of it's that surprising. So we used that planning methodology that you saw and those principles to effectively ask our board for $30 million. And this is what we did with that. We, first thing is sub-meter everything. So 81 meters, measuring everything we could about our buildings in terms of the energy inputs. Significant upgrades to building automation. I told you we had blind spots. So this is increasing the visibility, functionality, clarity of what's happening in our spaces, giving our operators the ability to quickly identify problems. We did a lot of recommissioning of buildings. We found that most buildings were nowhere near their original design intent. So not even to the point of trying to make them massively better. It was just, let's make them function like they were designed to function. And we found a lot of equipment to repair and a lot of things that weren't doing anything like the design. And we also found a number of spaces in really poor condition, which happened to get a facelift on the way by. So you're seeing a bunch of before and after here. It's just, that's what happens with the process. They're healthier and cleaner brighter, nicer, more modern, all in the business of carrying out your plan. Lighting, a really obvious one. The first thing that your energy service companies will go after, because it's a fairly quick win. In our case, we had a fairly efficient T8 lighting system that had been upgraded several times. Where it was really deficient was on the control side, and we had areas that were overlit, just too many fixtures. So our pass-through was a better LED fixture. It was fewer of them, more strategically placed, and tighter controls on occupancy and scheduling. And I'm showing you a few dated numbers in here. It's about 2019, 2020, so just sort of pre-pandemic, but we'd been through about 55% of the buildings on the Oakville campus, which is about 1.2 million square feet, something like that. Brampton campus had about 900,000 square feet. We've done about 35% of those spaces, and we did a lot of LED, and we've continued on all of those. So those numbers, if I were to update them, are probably a little bit further along at this point. And then we did a moderate amount of work on envelope, particularly on solar gain, infiltration around exterior doors. We repaired window systems that didn't make any sense. And we've been working our way a little bit slowly through skylight systems. We've got just a ton of very leaky, poor condition skylights. I've been converting them where I can into this clear story format because it makes it easier to maintain. And then just a point to the culture. In the process of recommissioning buildings, rolling out new lighting, redesigning and retrofitting spaces, even just as our normal course of business of like refitting a classroom or building out a lab, we're working with all of the new technological solutions that we'd identified through our energy savings master plan. And when we got around to the point of some new construction, we were able to really just input that as hard spec, essentially say, this is what Sheridan uses and what we expect to see in the building program. And it was really nice. It built some consistency between the campuses. It allowed us to integrate systems, particularly the centralized lighting and building automation control systems that are all very similar, helped our operations teams understand that they're seeing the same kind of equipment, and allowed us to really focus on progressing the energy performance of the buildings. The other thing we did with new buildings that I recommend to everybody is, again, go back to your global benchmarks and see to what standard buildings are being constructed around the world, and hard spec that. Put a performance spec on it, I mean to say. So in the case of the buildings shown here, which are not our newest, we asked the market for 100 kilowatt hours a square meter a year. That was equivalent to a German A-rated building for academic. And it was about 2 times better than traditional to code build at the time. We got a lot of pushback from the market about wanting to deliver it, but the truth is they did. They bid and they did it. So it's possible. You just got to really push them for it. And there's so much more I could tell you. We could have a whole other lecture.
Yeah, I can imagine. There is so much in this. So the 30 million that you got to do the whole series of initiatives that you did, was there? I can imagine there's a business case for payback and whatnot. Has that kind of proven out? And if there is savings, is it at least partially retained for reinvestment, or is there a process that Sheridan follows in that regard?
Hasn't really been much need to retain for reinvestment because it was allocated, it was there. But I think I actually, maybe my next slides, oh no, not quite, but in a couple slides, I do talk a little to kind of where did we land in the results
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
category. I'll give you a bit of that.
Absolutely, we can wait for
Okay.
that.
Okay, so I just want, this just follows the Trias Energetica a little bit more for you, and I'm going to step up the pace a little bit because I want to leave some time. So we really wanted to focus on how do we get all the buildings onto a common network. And this, remember I mentioned rooftop units and the whole thing, like not every building was tied to something. So you can see here our initial thinking about how pipe networks would end up linking the buildings with hot water, and also how we'd provide for future capacity, which is what you're kind of seeing in the transparent beige orange on the right. So all of that kind of into our early thinking about the integration. About summer of 2016, we began actually installing pipes in the ground on a couple of our campuses. So you're looking here at an EN 253 pipe. So this is a global best practice. This is the European standard pipe, manufactured. So this is factory made, and essentially factory made as a system. So they'll ship it to you in pieces, but they'll kind of tell you, the manufacturer will tell you this part connects to this part, use this fitting, put it here. And when they do that, it allows them to actually engineer your system to handle expansion naturally. So you don't have to put in funky expansion loops and other weird things. It'll just handle it with 90-degree bends. It's a really cool pipe spec because it's got a nice hard jacket to protect it from all kinds of abrasion, and even to some extent a careless backhoe, but that only goes so far. Has a close cell foam insulation, so a nice high R value. It'll retain the heat of the network or cooling of the network, as it may be. You can see there are examples where you have a single direction of pipe, but you could also have your supply and return in one jacket. That ends up being slightly more efficient as well as easier to install in some ways. And has integrated leak detection. So you will actually know if there's either a leak from the pipe or the jacket's been damaged and there's water getting in, because that affects the R value. And then you could actually put a reflectometer on that. I think you can get within about 5-10 meters of where you got to dig with a skilled operator with a reflectometer. So really nice, high lifetime, like 50 to 75 years in the ground. Very low failure rates if they're installed well. They don't go very deep. They go in all kinds of terrain, and you notice in the bottom middle that they can actually bend a little bit. They have a little bit of flex to them, so you can actually work them around gentle curves and gradients. Then you got to put heat into it. So our focus was really paying for that pipe network, because we view the pipe network and that integration, all of that distribution, as the platform for everything we're going to do in the future. So low carbon sources of heat can go on that same heat network, no problem with that, but we got to pay for the thing first. So we went for cheap and efficient, which turned out to be the combined heat and power engines that you're kind of seeing here left. These TEDM units come from Czechia. They're 12-cylinder natural gas engines tied to a generator with every possible form of heat recovery they can find. They'll extract high 80s to low 90s of all the primary heat in terms of percents, with very high efficiency. And we've sized them to provide the base load heat for the campus. So they are not electrically sized, they're heat sized. So think of it as a boiler sized the right way with waste electricity, as opposed to electricity sized with waste heat. This is commonly the way people think about them. And another global best practice was we noted that many European jurisdictions use their energy centers as beautiful architectural objects. I don't have any examples in my slides here, but you can go look them up. They're really, really neat. And we thought we could do the same here. Why not make this a beautiful architectural object, as well as glass it in and make it something that inspires curiosity for our students, for our community. And it's worked exactly that way. I was just on a call an hour ago with the associate dean in this building, who's trying to figure out how to do more and more class activity in and around this energy center. And I have multiple tours every year of this energy center with community. It's inspired a lot of conversations. It's just a fantastic way to get the conversation going. And every single piece of like sustainability oriented literature that goes out, even with the minor sustainability theme, this picture will be in it. This one, another energy center, different campus, constructed in a basement in previously occupied space. This was corporate records, and it became our central plant. So we were proving to ourselves we can do it not just in new build, but we can do it in retrofit. These are called energy transfer stations. They're the interface for your district energy system to your building. This is, again, a global best practice. They're manufactured by companies like Danfoss, Alpha Laval, SWEP, who manufacture them globally. In our tender for these, we said we wanted the global reputation, and we wanted the manufacturer to, the company to establish manufacturing in North America so that our supply was not coming from overseas, and to begin building the market here. These units you're looking at were supplied by Danfoss. You might see their little logo on one of the control centers there. Again, not advocating for them or pitching for them. The units are nice. Manufactured in Michigan. Once on site, took about a week or so to get them plumbed in. Basically, we had already brought the pipes nearby. The technician came out, did each commissioning step in about an hour. So I had him do 10 of these over about a day and a half. And this was just as our heating season was starting. So the fact that we were able to get these shipped and skid, put in place, plumbed in quickly, and more importantly, commissioned and running in a very short period of time was crucial for us. And I think a real advantage to having something like this. But heat exchanger, your circulation pumps, your metering, so you know how much heating water is being distributed. A fairly sophisticated field computer that can do some optimization. And it basically is driving for the lowest supply temperature to the building that's feasible at any given time, and works to maintain the temperature difference on your primary network. So it's doing a lot of good optimization for you. This unit can also do your heating water and domestic hot water in one. So it's a really amazing system in many ways. One other thing I would maybe say as an advantage, one point of communication, if I want to pull the building into setback, I can do it right from this machine. I don't have to adjust anything else. Again, slightly dated numbers, but our Oakville campus had managed about a 30% reduction back to source energy by the time we kind of tallied up the numbers. A little bit less at our Davis campus, which was primarily countering a bunch of enrollment growth and a bunch of equipment intensity that came in. Province decarbonized heavily, which helped us in terms of absolute GHGs. We figure we contributed about 11% of direct impact on reduction from our activity just to that point. But in absolute terms, it dropped by about half. We were and have been basically pulling about $1.5 million off an energy spend that was $6.5 million. And at that time, it accumulated anywhere from $7 to $8.5 million of just simply energy savings return over a few years of implementation. So we were tracking pretty good. What I would say beyond that is because we were ready with a plan, we attracted a fair bit of federal and provincial investment under the SIF program when it rolled out. And when I kind of tally up a few of the others in there, it presents kind of an interesting picture. Spend out about 24 million, but depending on what you want to tally up and into it, between deferred maintenance, being smarter about our hydro billing, and actually catching errors and opportunities on billing, to things that I would attribute to sort of improved energy management generally. And we stack those in with some of the grants. The money's back in the coffers in many ways. We actually managed to leverage quite a bit. And this is the last sort of bit. It's just kind of where do we go from here? A huge reputational boost. There was a lot of curiosity about the work. A lot of people coming to ask questions. A lot of people writing up bits and pieces of the project along the way. We garnered a few fairly high-profile awards. So all of that kind of helping to raise the profile of the work and get the attention of the community. And again, another story that I could tell in an entire session is kind of how did we end up working with our communities to build their 30-year community energy plans, which is not something I anticipated at the time we started the project, but something we found that we were quite good at, able to help a great deal in our communities. We're now at a point where we've made this huge dent, and we're very aware that we've got that net zero target. When I look at sort of a science-based target on it, I think we're going to have to be at zero carbon in early 2040s. So I think by about 2042. So this is the timeline I'm kind of focused on. And I'd mentioned the district energy system as being there. I still see that as a fundamental platform. It integrates our buildings. And now the pieces we need to solve in there are essentially how do we lower the temperature of that network and how do we integrate new supplies? And there's a lot of pieces that come to that. One thing I found in the meantime is that because of the quality of work we were able to do in some of these really neat projects, these high visibility projects, we built a huge amount of trust across the institution, particularly with the leadership team, on our ability to deliver really innovative, interesting leading initiatives. And that's why it became one of the key strategic enablers in the strat plan. That allows me very different leverage and opportunities within my office. So now I've kind of split two functions in the office, one focused on the technical implementation of campus designs going forward. So this is partly retrofit, partly new build. And then another focused on how do we have the institutional conversation about sustainability. That's what those two functions do. The other thing that's happened is there's been a recognition that this has to be more standard way of doing things. So rather than one-off project work, even if it's a portfolio of projects, there's now an understanding that how we manage assets over the long term, particularly stuff that's highly depreciated over the 50-year lifespan of the college, that just simply needs to be more business as usual. So we're working very heavily on formalized asset management strategies, policies, and plans. My team's actually building guidelines and standards for new and existing buildings and the technologies in them. I'm working on a thing called Mission Zero 2024, which is essentially that forward plan. And then we have a campus master plan, of course, the massing, the timing, the pieces. So think of those as an integrated set with our key inputs, particularly the two top documents I'm showing here, helping direct and drive that work going forward. Here's a closer look at some of what is in that forward plan, what we're working our way through. There are a lot of us with our heads down right now trying to figure out all of the pieces. So at some point, maybe I'll come back and I'll tell you about what comes out of this plan. But the interesting piece is, I think, is being able to take these pictures of deteriorated, depreciated assets and the investments that have to happen and put, as they're identified and carried out, put new lenses on them that essentially say, how do we not only do a like-for-like replacement of this asset, but position it in a way that's continuing to push us towards that 2042 key transition date. So far more business as usual for us now in the team. So I'm not necessarily looking to do another big portfolio push like I did with the Energy and Climate Master Plan, but now more looking to just integrate the work going forward in a way that will drive all of the college's significant capital investment towards this goal. And at this point, the college is investing really on the order of about 20 to 30 million a year now on capital recovery in totality, as a result of kind of recognizing the need. This really is, I think, the last slide, which is just that brand new projects being proposed, brand new ways that the college is going to shape its campus, engage with community. And we continue to engage on every single one of these to say, how do these fit a net zero profile? So we're looking at a podium and tower here. Some portion of it's timber framed. It's all low temperature heated. It's all fairly high temperature cooled. It's all tied to central plant. It has sophisticated controls. We're talking about how that gets done before it gets built.
So that's an actual building that's in planning?
This is one that the, you got the architect's early rendering for the brochure and they're fundraising for it. In the meantime, what we're doing is we're designing the preliminary spec. Nice.
Excellent. Thanks so much. It's been fascinating to go through that whole story. Really appreciate it, and appreciate all the work that's going on that comes to life in the slides. I've asked some questions and I have lots more, but just want to throw. We have just a few minutes right now before we let you go. Now, if you need to start going, that's fine. But yeah, really interested to hear the questions and feedback. Erin, please.
Yes, thanks. That was awesome. Your district energy system, so that was a retrofit of what you had to begin with. Like I'm guessing you had multiple boiler rooms or mechanical rooms and then consolidated.
Love this question, Erin. So I said that at a first level, of abstraction when you're planning, you don't have all the detail, and you're it's sort of a good enough. So we said, okay, for our plan, what we're going to assume is that all the buildings find a way to be integrated. And we didn't go further than that during the planning stage. So we get to implementation and we're looking at existing boiler rooms, a lot of interior piping, and finding that a lot of it seemed inadequate, either in capacity or in terms of the level of insulation, or the layout was chaotic. Primary and secondary loops that are poorly blended, all kinds of things like that, and came reasonably quickly to a decision that we just didn't want to work with that bit of the system. The interesting piece that the district energy thing did for us is it allowed us to take that distribution network outside and put it in the ground and treat it almost like a separate utility service to every building, which allows us to independently meter it, to isolate a building without affecting the rest of the network, allows us to optimize a main loop as well as a building loop. And we found just tons of advantages in the model. So it's essentially a net new system installed parallel to the old, but also great for implementation because we could just switch to the new network when it was ready.
Right. And was your ability to move forward with that project based on a return on investment?
We did the return on investment for the entire project portfolio, not the district energy on its own. And that's really important because there is the synergy that comes from reducing the demand of buildings, means smaller pipes into the building, smaller services, smaller main plant, and pipes in and of themselves. Where's the return? It's pipes in the ground, right? So you've got a capital investment that's sunk into that network that, as a standalone project, really doesn't have that much appeal. It has to be part of a bigger strategy. Right.
Right. And the last question I have for you, so you're talking about the $30 million a year of investment?
What I was saying is that, our initial package was 30 million. Now what's happened is that when our entire finance and facilities team went through the condition of assets on the campus, we realized that the level of investment required to actually bring assets to something reasonable
Mhm.
is not 2 or 3 million a year. It's 20 to 30. And
Yep.
so it's that. I mean, that's an investment that reflects the state of the assets, not any particular ambitions to get to net zero. It's just simply the reality of dealing with that backlog in a serious way.
Yeah, I think
And
many of us are in that boat, and our funding that we get for, maintenance and renewal projects is that $2 to $3 million. So
right,
just curious where you're getting the funds from, if you have an injection of capital or operating, if the government's providing you something else, or if it is just that you're searching for these 6 different methods to build up that funding.
yeah, it's a bit of where's the institution placing its priority at this time, and I think Sheridan, for its part, is it's not exactly like where they'd love to go spend all their money, but at the same time, we incur significant risk by letting the assets degrade. I mean, what's the use of having a campus full of buildings that are in such poor condition that no one wants to be in them? They don't serve the function anymore. So there's just it's just a strategic recognition that we're going to have to make that investment. And I don't think anyone's like super pumped about it other than us who benefits from being able to carry out the project.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a tough argument to make. And I'm again, probably all in the same boat, that we know there's so much deferred maintenance to do and it's just not enough funding to do it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thanks for your questions. Stephen, did you have questions or?
No, I didn't. I just, this was very, it was very good, and we certainly appreciate, what you've shared, Herb. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Yeah, in terms of, we're getting near the time, definitely, that we've allotted to this. And it's been really fascinating. So going forward, you're putting together your plans of how to get to specific points. Do you have actual objectives then for, 2025 or 2030, even in the shorter term, that you need to get to? Or are you still kind of in the process of working even those timelines out?
The timelines I've got at the moment, the initial push we did, the initial energy master plan, essentially looking for reduction of the energy profile and again, sort of carbon with it from scope 1 and 2, as a milestone of like 50% by about 2030. So what I've kind of observed in the pattern of asset renewal we're in is I think we're trending very well to that, and particularly the project funds. I kind of wish I could have done it all in that funding envelope, but what we did manage to do were key things like those district energy platforms, the central plants were sized for the future there, and the standards and programs and vendor relationships and a lot of key pieces that allow us to just continue towards 50 for 2030. So I'm confident that that target's going to be met on the path we're on. Then the piece I'm kind of digging into for that 2042 is how do I use the combination of new buildings that are proposed in the campus master plan with a smart program of retrofit renewal at the campus core to bring the network temperature down and introduce the new supplies, which are really the kind of the key pieces that we need to get there. So that's it's tricky but doable, I think is the answer to that.
Excellent. No, it's great to hear you're on that right track. Even getting to that 50% by 2030 is pretty ambitious, and that's great. Aaron, did you have another question?
Yeah, I did. Do you have a plan for your CHPs to get off natural gas, or how are you going to handle the carbon from those?
Yeah, it's been kind of fun watching the federal backstop make those a little less economic over time. But they're still doing well when natural gas prices are not elevated or volatile like they've been for us the past year. And my thinking is that the new building stock we've got is going to require some expansion of plant. Like it's significantly more square footage. Like it's, doubling and tripling campus size. So the same core network needs to be expanded and built, and there'll be new sections added to that, and there'll be new central plant capacity added. New central plant capacity into newer buildings suggests I can build low carbon, low temperature central plant in buildings to go. And then the CHP phase out is basically at the point when my campus core has either been renewed or bulldozed.
Okay, so you're you don't have a specific plan. It's just kind of wait until that point and see what the technology is, or like, are you looking at keeping the CHPs and going to hydrogen, or are you looking at electrifying, or is this all in question?
Sorry, I was trying to answer that, and I don't know if I quite conveyed it well.
It's the carbon of the natural gas. That's what I'm curious about, because we have a CHP on campus as well, and that's a crux for us to get to net zero carbon, as well. We use a bunch of natural gas in the CHP. Yeah.
So the pieces I would try to unpack to explain this is that there are high temperature systems that are like a one-to-one correspondence with older buildings. So think poor building envelope, radiator systems, undersized coils, like those systems, those legacy systems in buildings force the temperature of the plant higher. That requires us then, maybe requires too strong a word. The most logical plant that connects to that is something that's combusting. It's fossil fuel would generate the higher temp.
Right.
Where I have a new building built to a higher envelope performance standard with low temperature equipment inside, I can feed that with low temperature sources, and that includes heat pumps, and it allows us to electrify and allows us to feed those to the extent possible with renewables. So we'll build new with new, which will decarbonize that component or sort of keep that from having a carbon impact. And then as we can refresh and renew the core, the piece that's existing high temperature, we can bring those down, and then those CHPs and boilers are not necessary.
Right.
That's the logic.
Awesome. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks for those excellent questions and responses. I know that we have so much more to talk about, but this is a really great starting point and so much more in the future that, continue to have this conversation. Again, look to our next meeting we've got scheduled in May, and looking forward to having an exciting speaker then, as well as a net zero workshop. And I think we've got some questions that came out of our conversation, but please feel free to forward those as well, so we can try to make sure we address those if we are able to put together a net zero campus workshop in the fall. And yeah, again, thanks everyone. I really appreciate it. And thanks so much, Herb. This was obviously folks are staying right to the end there. This is it was really interesting. You've done some great things. So thanks for sharing those with us. Really appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah, have a great day.
Thank you.